Right. Hello, folks, and welcome to Wednesday's edition of AP World History, upon which we are going to be discussing the downfall of the greatest civilization in the history of the world. So, it's the moment we've been waiting for a while, to say the least. All of you, I'm sure, are sitting on the edge of your seat saying, man, this is awesome. It's the number one place I'd want to be on a Wednesday if I had to choose. So I'm excited for your passion and just excitement over this topic. We're going to have some fun today. I can see Lucy has a smile on her face. That is great. All right. So to get class started off today, we are going to do what we always do, which is you're going to try to do this off the top of your head without using Google. You don't need to. Try to type this and send it as a private chat. So I'll do the little share screen here and we'll see what we get. There it is. And you got it. List the Chinese dynasties in order in the chat box. As usual, I'll give you the first one, the Shang. Yeah, remember them? And I'm going to try to figure out where everybody is then. So try to do that. I'm going to take attendance very quickly, and then we will move forward as we've got stuff to do. If you were not in here last semester, you still had this content, try your best, see what you can come up with. By no means do I expect everybody to be perfect or anything, but try it. You might like it. All right. I've got attendance here, so let's go ahead and see what we have for responses. We have a song. Sorry. Yes. Shang Sui Tang Song Ching. Shang Jin Han Tang. Song Tang Ming, question mark. Shang Zhou Qin Han Sui Tang. Victoria, you're getting closer. Song Zhou Qin Han Sui Tang Song Yuan Ming Ching. We got a winner. H squared, the Hannah of the Hittles. Song Shang Tang Sui Han Chin. That's a little strange order. Yes, you did misspell the first one. Shang, Sui, Tang, Song, Ming, Yuan, Ming, Qing. Lily Dole, close. Song, Tang, Yuan, Ming, Qing, close. Shangzhou, Qin, Han, Tang, Song, Oh, Han, Sui. Lucy McJunkins, you forgot the Sui. Yeah, you're right. Shangzhou, something like that. Something. All right. So we have some good Sui, Song, Tang, Yuan, Ming, Qing. Oops. All right. I will go ahead and enlighten everybody on the way to remember these, even though it's really the ancient ones aren't so important anymore as they used to be, but it's still fun. Remember, there's a song. Oh man, I see there's so many people with their video cameras on. Thank you so much. We're trying to continue to get more people on doing that. That's excellent. So it goes. I haven't done this in a while. Shangzhou, Qin, Han, Shangzhou, Qin, Han, Sui, Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing, Yuan, Ming, Qing, Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong. See? So Liliana, that's the first time you've experienced my performance. Can I get a thumbs up, please? At least making me feel better about myself. Thank you. That's awesome. Do you guys want to hear Mr. Renshaw try to sing it for the first time? He put thumbs down. He said no. He's studying for a test tomorrow. So we're going to leave him alone and not mess with him anymore, even though he's in the room. All right. So the last Chinese dynasty, you are correct, is the Qing. And that's just their dynastic name. They were really the Manchus. Oh, before I do this, let me get a little ahead of myself here. Let me do a new share just to show you what I've got on Canvas for you. So if you go to modules, I've got two things for you today. My PowerPoint is pretty closely aligned with the one that's on here, 27.3, China PowerPoint with political cartoons. But this note sheet will follow the outline of what I am going to talk about. So if you want to download this note sheet and just take notes on it today from my talk, that would be an easy way for you to organize the information and not have to go back and look at the slides. Okay? Or take notes however you want to. Probably don't sit idly and do nothing. Yeah. Some good advice. So I'll give you 30 seconds or so to download that note sheet if you want to. It's something I would give you if we were in class. And again, some of you would use, some of you would say, I don't need that. I'm a beast mode. So it's up to you. All right. So gonna go ahead and get started though. So we kind of talked about this, but the resume share. Can you Brooke, can you hit thumbs up? Can you see the slide now? The Manchus. All right, thanks everybody on video. All right, so Manchuria is a province north of Japan, north of China, and a little bit to the left on the map, which is west of Korea. All right. And obviously, China had always had pressure from nomadic peoples in the north, aka the only time that China was governed by foreign people was, does anyone remember? What foreign people invaded China successfully? There was only one in history. You want to use the chat function, or if you want to unmute and just blast it out loud, that works. Nobody? The only foreigners to invade China successfully were the Mongols under the ruler Kublai Khan. And he established the Yuan dynasty, if you remember right. So after that, the Ming were in power, and the Ming members shut down Zheng He did not allow for foreign trade, only at Macau and Canton. And they had a lot of problems protecting their north side. So the Manchus were traditionally nomadic people from Manchuria, and they copied Chinese culture. They paid tribute to the Chinese, but eventually, and to the to the Ming, but eventually they ended the Ming Dynasty after 2 decades of fighting and taking Beijing. And so when they did that, even though they were not ethnically Chinese, so not from the Middle Kingdom, they took on Chinese culture even more. So what's the word for becoming more like the Chinese? It starts with an S. Anybody remember? The word for becoming more like the Chinese, or having Chinese influence. It starts with an ends and ends in acation. And the Brooke, you got it?
Is it sinification?
Sinification. That is beautiful. I'm gonna go ahead and throw that in the chat function. Oh, whoops. It didn't tell me that all these chats were on here. All of you got the Mongols. Good job. And Katya said sinification. It's already there for everyone to see. Beautiful. So the Manchus from Manchuria became Sinified, took on the dynastic name the Qing. They were only one of 2 Chinese dynasties that were foreign to rule China. You had the Yuan and the Qing. Okay. And they're pretty famous because they're the last Chinese dynasty before China goes into absolute utter chaos, and eventually comes out faux communist, to be determined later. All right. So one of the key themes for the Manchus was taking land that had basically been left alone, and to deal with the growing population due to all of the food from the New World. Remember things like potatoes and corn, and um, the idea of the Columbian Exchange had an effect on China later on. They need to expand. And so due to population pressure, the Qing would be the second largest Chinese dynasty to the Tang dynasty. As you can see on the map, significantly larger than the Ming. All right. There, as they set up rule, a couple important things was they definitely bought into the Confucian aspects that all other Chinese dynasties other than the Yuan dynasty had used. And that is pretty, at this point in time, I think you understand it's called filial piety, or the 5 key relationships, where the eldest male is always the most respected. Women were definitely lower in the social order. In fact, during this time period, you see, again, almost the exact opposite of what you see in the West. Women had even less rights, and it could be more comparable to the Ottoman Empire and Islamic rule than Western style rule at this point. Civil service exams were continued, unlike in the Yuan. And although the Manchus only made up 2% of society, they controlled most of the upper level positions. And then they relied on ethnic Chinese to be the regional rulers, local rulers, and they didn't cause nearly the disruption that the Yuan would to the traditional Chinese ways. There was also then a government mandate that men had to wear the queue. And you see in the picture, this is called a I Chinese queue, but I think it's called a Japanese queue. It's just the tradition in East Asia. But this was part of the Manchurian way of life. And so every 10 days, men had to shave the front of their head, and then they had to grow out the back of their hair. You can see the quote on here: if you keep your hair and lose your head, or keep your head and cut your hair. So nobody's complaining about their haircut. If you wanted to be a respected male, in the Confucian society, you got yourself a Q. That's intense. The Japanese did the same thing, but then they made them cut it off to show that they were that they had adopted Western ways. All right. Moving on here. In the Qing rule or the Manchu rule, at first it's almost like every other Chinese dynasty we've learned. It's so cyclical. Remember, right? It's called the dynastic cycle, and it's like a circle. You see my hand making a circle on the video. If you're looking at my hand, it's making a circle. And remember, at the top of the circle is a new emperor or a new family that rules. And then you have success. So the Manchus lowered tax demands on the peasants. They put 10% of their budget into repairing dikes, dams, canals, which typically made it nice for the peasants because then they could water their plants and didn't have to deal with flooding. The problem is because of this, large regional landowners became more powerful. And eventually, this is going to lead to the issue with opium. Because large regional landowners don't necessarily have to follow Confucian traits or the civil service exams that they had passed because, let's be honest, they just collected rent from peasants, so they were wealthy. They didn't rule. The fingernails, if you remember right, you can look on the screen. You see the fingernails; those are pretty impressive. This became a object of wealth. And fourthly, here, the Ming lifted the travel prohibition, meaning that a new like upper middle class group of businessmen could trade with foreigners. And so that's going to kind of change the economy to being more of an open economy and allowing more of the Western ideas like the Industrial Revolution, like the government systems of the West that were in question here, like the Enlightenment and revolutionary movements that would lead to socialism and communism, are going to make their way through these compradors who are this kind of mid-level business person who found a newfound kind of had a newfound role in society because they could now trade with the West being the Dutch, the British, the French, eventually the United States. Yeah. The Portuguese for a while. All right, so it's pretty quickly that we see the decline, though, in the Manchu rule, and it'll be pretty obvious when I show you in a second here. But just like the dynastic cycle works, when you get to the half the circle, and you've had a few emperors that have been successful rulers, typically they become corrupt, and so China bled from the inside out. All right, when their civil service exam becomes corrupt, that's the fabric of their society. That was a code based on morality. And so their leadership was based on morals and ethics. When your morals and ethics become corrupt, and when offices start to be sold, kind of like, let's say, France in the late 1700s, when the Catholic Church and nobles were just buying their positions, or let's say the Catholic Church before the Protestant Reformation, obviously that's called simony, and it favors the wealthy, does not favor morality. At that time, then, money goes to bribes, not to actually ruling like they were supposed to. The peasants are going to suffer food shortages and famine. Banditry becomes widespread by the early 1800s. And again, officials being paid off to turn a blind eye to British trade and to opium markets. So that leads then to this whole thing of the opium problem. All right. Oftentimes, students are fixated on this. I mean, there is some definite real world application here. As before COVID-19 hit, if you pay attention to Indiana legislature, that's like laws that are made in Indiana and what the Senate and the House of Representatives in our state had to worry about was that we had a significant drug problem. We had a significant heroin problem or opiate problem. This is why doctors have to be so careful when they prescribe any type of opium anymore. Why, if you ever had your wisdom teeth taken out, or if you ever broken your arm, or let's say maybe you, again, had to have some type of surgery, you might get like 20 or 30 pills, but they're not going to give you a year's worth or anything like that. And that's because there's a lot more regulation because of opiate abuse and the problems in our state. In fact, they said it was an epidemic, okay, before COVID-19 hit. That's kind of been brushed aside because COVID-19 hits a larger portion of the society, us. Now, let's talk about what happened here in China. So the British were tired of paying their gold and silver to the Chinese. Also, if you remember right, the British had to fund wars. Let's say the war, the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. They also had to fight a war against the United States of America, or at that time was the 13 colonies. Some of you probably heard last week that the British also were the last group of people to invade Washington, D.C., or our national capital, where in 1815 they burned down the White House. Okay, so the British had their hands full controlling their empire, and they did not have the money to continue to trade silver and gold with China. So they were looking for an advantage. Opium from India, East India, which was traditionally known as a breadbasket for India, was the ticket. And so that's why millions of people starved on the continent of the Indian subcontinent in areas like Bengal and northern India to make a highly potent and addictive form of poppy. Most of you have probably seen a poppy plant before. Okay, when you vulcanize that, you turn it into a liquid. You can then let it harden, and it turns into a drug that you can smoke. So, Chinese government caught on too late, and by 1938, 1% of the population was strung out. And remember, when your leadership, your top dogs, your people that are your smartest in society, your officials have to pass these exams are also your most wealthy people. When they are addicted to opium, they're not going to be making sound decisions. Thus, the Chinese attempt to outlaw this trade and didn't go so well for them. Okay, so here you can see a pretty classic picture of an example of an opium den or an opium pipe. Again, extremely hallucinogenic, and also at the same time addicting. And so this alone would destroy the favorable balance of trade or the economic advantage that China had over Europe and really over the rest of the world along the Silk Trade route for 2,500 years, 2,500 years. Okay, it's a pretty big deal. Again, it had societal effects on the government, which then affected the economy, which then trickled down to, as always, who pays the price when the government is not doing well? The poor people. And so the trickle-down effect is on the peasantry, while the upper class is enjoying getting high. I did a little math earlier just because I was interested and curious. So by 1939, this is the dawn of the what's called the Opium Wars with Britain. 40,000 chests were being imported a year at 133 pounds a chest. Okay, that comes out to about 5,320,000 pounds of opium per year. That is like refined pure opium. It's a lot. Okay, and it's like disturbing a lot. Now you're saying, man, we should condemn or vilify the British, but obviously the British are doing what they could do, which was practicing capitalism and trying to make as much money and make a dent on a society that they had really limited, unfavorable trade with for a long period of time. So that takes us then to the Opium Wars. And I want you to see the picture on the left. I always am like perplexed at this. So at Macau and Canton, these were the only two ports the British and the Portuguese were allowed to trade with and have their own factories. Look at this warehouse. Can you imagine just even climbing to the top of this and how much opium would actually be held in this? And it would make you wonder why in the world the Chinese would ever let people even get away with this. I mean, or turn a blind eye to it for so long. Okay, the two graphs or charts on the right are pretty important. Okay, look at the number of chests in thousands imported per year, and it goes up to 1832. Go to about the year 1800 as it goes in kind of in increments of 10 or so. It's not perfect, but look at how much it increases between 1810 and 1832. Goes from less than 5,000 a year to close to 25,000 chests of opium per year being imported. So that's pretty eye-opening. Then the bottom, if you look at the bottom right, I kind of want to show you one area that I think you should pay attention to here, and that is right here. Take a look at that. Okay, between 1800 and 1830, this is all of this right here is China making more money off its trade than it's giving out in silver. Okay, and so that means that the government is essentially making money off of this trade. And then you go to around, just shortly after 1800, and you can see how silver stops flowing out of China and starts flowing into the pocketbooks of the British. So obviously the Chinese aren't going to idly sit back and say, yeah, go ahead and take it to us. They're going to go ahead and try to stop this. So that leads to what's known as the Opium Wars, which wars is kind of it's a broad term. It's not really a set of wars as so much as it is a set of the British commanding major amount of concessions from the Chinese because of the fact that the Chinese dumped almost all of the British supply of opium in the South China Sea. Okay, so when the warehouses are destroyed, Britain demanded restitution. That means payment for for something that you've done to cause war. Great Britain made the Chinese junks look just like the name says, like a piece of junk, and no pun intended, McJunkins. And so I used to use junk 3 times in one sentence if anyone was listening. It's pretty impressive. So the Qing Emperor then was forced to sue for peace, and this is called the Series of Unequal Treaties. All right, the Series of Unequal Treaties. Great Britain said, all right, because we beat you in war, we are not going to invade you and take you. You are China. You're much too big for that. But here's what we want. They got Hong Kong, okay? And they got to keep Hong Kong for a lease of like 150 years, I believe. I would have to look that back up, that exact agreement. They got extra land then for new warehouses. They had new ports opened up. I want to say like 40 new ports where they could trade. And they were given what's called extraterritoriality. That could be the longest word you're going to use all day. I wouldn't be surprised. And extraterritoriality means that even though they were on foreign soil, their merchants, their traders, their soldiers, their missionaries, anybody who was British didn't have to follow the Chinese government's laws. They only had to follow their own country's laws. So it's why it's called the series of unequal treaties, because it was devastating to the Chinese and the kind of the fabric that they had always only allowed foreign trade at a certain area. All right, so I'm gonna have to hustle. I didn't realize it's ended at 1:30. All right, so here's a good picture right here. Primary document. Lily Dole already said, like the Boston Tea Party with drugs, so you stole my thunder. Thank you for doing that. Here is Lin Tzu dumping 2.6 million pounds of opium into the South China Sea, 500 laborers, 22 days. And yes, this is the Boston Tea Party of China. If you wanted to get a good buzz, just jump into the South China Sea. You probably won't wake up to remember it, but yeah, I think you get the point. Obviously, the British weren't happy, and that's what sparked this. That's what sparked the Opium Wars, which would continue to have a drastic effect on China. Here are British warships, okay, with iron on the side and modern cannons fueled by steam. Do you see that? Versus Chinese junks. Here's a better picture for you. The Chinese did not fare well. And remember, they did not have an emphasis on the Navy anyways. So that's going to lead to an extremely chaotic period of the second half of the 1800s or the second half of the 19th century for China. All right. So take a look at this. Probably the most famous rebellion that you've never heard of because we live in the United States is called the Taiping Rebellion. And oh gosh, I knew I was going to mess his name up, so I even tried to practice it earlier. This isn't my forte. Hong Xiuquan, okay, was a semi-socialist, semi-Christian who said he was the son of Jesus Christ in the southern part of China, started a rebellion against the Qing government. Okay? Remember, socialism, land redistribution, equality for all people, women's rights is so anti-Chinese, it's not even funny. And so get it right this time. Hong Xiuquan, there we go, closer. Started this rebellion, and it caused upwards of 50 million deaths. Okay, he actually took the capital of Nanjing, okay, occupied the city, and it wasn't without foreign intervention. So British and German troops were teamed together with the Qing, who thought this guy was crazy, even though his reforms were Western-based, and they put down this rebellion. But the massive amount of death and the time that it took over 10 years to put this rebellion down was a signal to Western countries to pounce on China. All right? Indirect benefit of making money, trade. All right? And so another popular uprising was known as a secret society called the Righteous Harmonious Fists. Okay, if you have ever heard of that before, I don't even know what the book talks about. I forget. Righteous Harmonious Fists. That is the real name of these boxers. Okay, they weren't like boxers like this. Okay, it's just the translation: righteous, harmonious fists, and secretly, members of the Qing family who were in government were funneling money to these group of um, young men who wanted to get rid of foreign influence. And so they started doing like secret guerrilla tactics, like blowing up warehouses, blowing up ships, blowing up trading buildings. And it took a coalition, you can see, of American, British, Russian, French, Italian, and Japanese soldiers to put down this rebellion that lasted from 1898 to 1901. We'll look more at that here in a second, but that was close to the end of the Qing dynasty. The fact that they were supporting a rebellion to remove Western power. Add icing on the top of a poorly made cake. You have the fact that the Japanese invaded China and took the Langdong Peninsula from the Chinese. Later on, they were forced to give it back. But in less than a year, the Japanese defeated the Chinese in war called the Sino-Japanese War #1, or just the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895. And the Japanese, which, as we'll talk about next week, had become industrial giants in a very short period of time, so much that they're able to defeat a Chinese Navy and Army on land. And you obviously know how small Japan is compared to China. In this war, the Japanese take Taiwan. They make sure Korea is independent of any Chinese influence. And they ask the United States if they can have Korea. And the United States response is, eventually you can have it, but not yet. And you're wondering why the United States has this influence, but you have to remember in 1898, 1899, we took the Philippines from the Spanish and started to really exert our influence in this area. So by 1910, take a look here. You will notice that large portions of China were basically carved out, and they were called spheres of influence. Okay? You're going to notice absently that there is a group or a country here that is missing. Who's missing from this group of powerful countries around 1910?
The United States.
Bingo. The United States is missing. Okay? Because we believed, even though we were very jingoistic and military focused at this point, we believed that we would not take China. We did not want China to be carved up like the continent of Africa was. Remember that? Same thing could have happened, but the United States did not want that to happen because they wanted to benefit from it, and they thought everyone should. So in 1899, the U.S. famously coined the document, what's known as the open door policy, when referring to China. Okay, and here's what it said. It provided that each great power should maintain free access to a treaty, port, or any other vested interest within its sphere. So you basically got to control whatever you called was your sphere of influence. Okay, if you were to go back and look at that map, like my buddy studied here in China, and he said there are German cities in China still because of this. So each country got to make their own area. 2, only the Chinese government should collect taxes on trade. So to support a government that would not fail, they said, all right, Chinese government still needs tax money. And then 3, no great power having a sphere should be granted exemptions from paying harbor dues or railroad charges. Basically, you still had to pay tax on using a harbor or port or transporting goods over land on a railroad. Okay? So why would the U.S. do this? They were also late to the party. Okay? And so the U.S., again, wanted to make sure that China didn't turn into the continent of Africa, so they doctor up this policy. This is what the rest of the world took it as. What do you see here? Can anybody try to explain this?
You see like a gateway into China, and then there's like the American, I think that's Uncle Sam, like guarding it with like the key. And then you see like the British and probably like the Russians and like all the other big continents, like kind of looking into it and trying to get in. But like the US is kind of like the guard keeper.
Yes. And so the key says American diplomacy. So basically, we're jumping in and telling the rest of the world what they can and cannot do in China. Okay. This is the U.S. entering global politics outside of, remember, the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny. Now, this is going to end. The end of imperialism is going to end when China's government fails. So, one of the people responsible for this was a Western educated doctor named Sun Yat-sen. We'll talk more about him, but he will create the Republican government, or the Republican Party, or the National Party in China, and he'll come back and be very important in the early 1900s after World War I, especially. The Manchus tried to borrow money to westernize and put down revolts. It failed. The last civil service exams given in 1905, and the last emperor was deposed in 1912, and that would be the end of classical China, which, again, those civil service exams were given pretty much uninterrupted since the Han Dynasty. Okay, quite a long time. All right. I know I'm going quickly here. It's because I have 3 minutes left. So there's some political cartoons here. Okay. There's a bunch of them. They're all really interesting. Here's China being carved up just like the continent of Africa, Lady Liberty in the background. These are very racist. Okay, here's China. You have Austria, Italy, Britain, Germany, France, Japan, Russia, all trying to take pieces of it. Here's a classic one. The Chinese man being weighed down by all these different harnesses and weights put on by Western countries and the Japanese. Okay, this is open door policy. Uncle Sam telling them what they can and cannot do. This is the metaphor of an egg about to crack, and you can see Uncle Sam staying in the background. And then you can see Japan underneath Uncle Sam saying, hey, how come we can't play with you? And Uncle Sam is higher than the Japanese. Okay, here you see the old idea that we're bringing missionaries in, but what's really coming are guns. This is the example of what the Chinese would, how the Chinese would take it from the Japanese and American businessmen. And then obviously, this is the open door policy, where it says, ask China, the way to keep the door open is not to let it be closed. And so you've got Britain with the old bulldog, the United States with Uncle Sam here, and then the little dog is Japan. And they're all saying keep it open because then there's going to be no war over China. Okay, that's going to lead me to stop the share real quick. I'm going to go to an extra credit opportunity. And I know the bell is going to ring here very shortly. So the extra credit opportunity looks like this. Make sure you're listening if you want to do it. Okay? You're going to create a political cartoon that reflects the downfall of the Chinese civilization at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. This is due by 11 a.m. Thursday and will not be accepted late. Your cartoon must be hand-drawn and colored and have a minimum of 100-word description of what you are reflecting. So you'll write your description, and then you will upload a picture of your political cartoon into a text box, enter it, and up to 10 points extra credit. Okay? On the PowerPoint, I had on there also at the end of it that you need to remember that you have a geography quiz on Friday. and chapter 28 notes are due Tuesday. All right. Tomorrow, we're going to be working with DBQs and documents. Make sure your DBQ is turned in, your rewrite. Okay. All right, I'm going to leave you here. The bell would have rang. Thanks, everybody. Be good. And we'll talk more tomorrow.